What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yugioh, deck of the day. Today we're starting with the Blazing Vortex deck. Blazing Vortex gave us support for so many decks that we just have so many things to cover. A lot of fun favorite decks, a lot of decks that got more support, other decks got a little bit, but alas we're going to cover almost all of them. And here's the first one. This is a Constellar deck profile. I cannot remember the last time I've had to dust off this deck. It's such an old deck. If you remember this deck, if you're a fan of it, then you go just way back, because I still remember the days where we had like Evil Storm and Constellar, the good duo to counter stuff like Dragon Rules and Spellbooks. It's been such a long time, so I'm happy that Konami still remembered that this deck exists and gave us an actually really good card for the deck. So we're going to share with you the profile we've come up with. So before we begin, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So to start off with the Constellar monsters, play 3 copies of Constellar Pollux. This is the Evil Storm caster of the deck. It gives you an extra normal summon. Your opponent cannot veil or imperm this. The way you normal summon this, it gets the effect right away. So it's the monster you want to be starting your plays with most of the time, because it's something that your opponent can really counter. 3 copies of Constellar Algedy. This is basically the same, but it's the one that can get countered, because when it's normal summoned, you can special summon a level 4 Constellar monster from your hand. So the way the deck works is of course very simple. You special summon 2 level 4 monsters on the field. If you have a Chaos, then you can just make them level 5, and then you can proceed to go into rank 4 plays or rank 5 plays depending on what you need. So it's a very straightforward deck. So if you're new to the game, I think this is a really good deck for you to pick up, because it helps you learn the basics of the deck. It only has one summoning mechanic, which is kind of sad. I wish it could use more, but still it's a very basic, straightforward deck you can play, learn very easily, and have a lot of fun while playing it. The new card here is 3 copies of Constellar Scythe. Scythe is the best card that this deck could have possibly got, because it made the spell and traps actually worth playing. Before, the spell and traps were so lackluster, and still are, but if they are searchable, Scythe helps you get access to them without having to play them in multiple copies, so you don't really hope of drawing them, you just search the one you need. So basically this card is an extender that if you control a Constellar monster, you can special summon it from the hand, and during your main phase you can add a Constellar spell and trap from your deck to your hand. And a Constellar Exceeds monster that has this as material, it says that before damage calculation, if it battles a light or dark monster, you can banish that monster, and light and dark is the most generic attribute, so you're going to use this a lot. So you're going to use this Whiptail effect very often in order to get rid of more monsters, and it gives you access to cards that you didn't really want to play before, because they are so mediocre that you don't want to play in multiple copies because you don't really want to see them. But if you can search them, then that's a whole different story. So I'm really glad that Konami found a way to make these cards playable while also giving us an extra monster on the field, because before, if you were starting with Algedy, then if your normal summon got stopped, and then basically you didn't have anything. But now you have an extender that also gives you a search, so I'm really happy that this card exists right now. It gives the deck a little bit more of a steam that really needed, because it hadn't dated that well. The deck is very slow control based, and we have better control decks right now. This is why. 3 copies of Constellar Chaos. This is the one that increases the levels. You can reduce the levels as well, but you don't really want to do that. You want to increase levels so you can go into the boss monster. And Pleiades is a monster that pretty much is an all-time good effect. A bounce is never a bad effect, no matter which format we're in. So this is why this deck has something always going for it, no matter when you want to play it. And this is why you need to play Chaos, and it's a Beast Warrior, which is important, and we'll get to that later. 3 copies of Sombra. Sombra is a Kyrkion of the deck, because you can just get one from the grave by banishing one from the grave, and then you get an extra normal summon. Sombra is the recovery play of the deck. The deck plays very similarly to Evil Storm, but instead of being a stun deck, it's more of a control deck, which is both very similar but still not the same. So this card is the one that gets you through the late game, because the deck doesn't have a lot of recovery plays. There's one card I play now that I have Scythe, because I wouldn't play this card before without being able to search it, but still Sombra is the one you would always play and give you access back from monsters from the grave, so you can special summon them. You can extra normal summon them. It's not even a special summon, so you can get more monsters on the field. Another card that I didn't really think was worth playing before, but now it is 3 copies of Constellar Sheraton. Sheraton is a good card because it's a Stratos of the deck. It gives you a Constellar monster search when it's normal summon. The problem is that it's a level 3 monster, and also you didn't really want to use your normal summon on this before, unless you start with Pollux, because it doesn't trigger a special summon, unfortunately, so it would not work with Algedy. But now you can search your Scythe, and then you can summon your Scythe, and Scythe has another effect that it helps you search all those spells and traps. So with that, you can combo it, because if you have a level 3 and level 4, you don't really do much. You cannot really go into links in this deck. I mean, you can, but it's not really optimal. You don't really want to play that many links. If you wanted to include links, you would have to play the highest being a link 2. If you go into a link 3 or higher in this deck, it's such a huge neck, you don't want to do that. But because there there is one spell and trap that helps you deal with the problem of Certain being a level 3, it's actually a really good card to max out on because it gives you more plays that you really need in this deck desperate. 3 copies of Galaxy Soldier. Galaxy Soldier is a good card in the deck. You play so many light monsters and you don't really want to draw multiple copies of anything because they can't really be used. So if you can just make this, it's very, very huge. It's a level 5 machine. Light, you can make either Infinity or Pleiades with it. So usually you will go Pleiades if the first Galaxy Soldier's effect gets stopped and you can get access to a second one, because if you can choose between Infinity and Pleiades, I think Infinity is always better, but still it's a really good card for the deck. 2 copies of Artifact Scythe. I do play an Artifact Engine in this deck for 2 reasons. Mainly because I can use them even if I draw Scythe, because it's so easy to Mayrak 4s in the deck, so I can just summon a Tornado Dragon and pop them on my own unless I have drawn the Sanctum itself or a Trap Trick to get into it, but it's also a level 5 light, so if you can just stick it on the field, and your opponent will most likely not be able to do anything unless they're playing Eldritch or Drytron, because those decks don't really need the extra deck, but still if it gets on the field and then you can keep it on the field for 1 turn, then you can use it for Pleiades because it's a level 5 light, so it has other applications than just being a stun card. And the only hand trap I play is 3 copies of Ash Blossom. I've said it in previous videos, if you're playing a weaker deck, I don't think you can afford to play more hand traps. You can play 0 hand traps if you want, but I think just playing 3 Ash is perfectly fine. It's the most generic hand trap right now. It will always have applications against pretty much anything, so this is why you don't really care about playing Ash without affecting the consistency of the deck a lot by playing a lot of hand traps. For the spells, play 1 copy of Constellar Twinkle. This card is the one that helps you make Sheraton's level pretty much be irrelevant, because you can change the level by 1 or 2, and it's a searchable card by Seducius, so you just need to get this and make your Sheraton level 4, so you can go into a rank 4 play, or if you have started with something like Chaos or Pollux, then you don't really need to use Chaos's effect, because if your opponent Veiler's Chaos, then sometimes that can happen, because if they know what they're doing, they will not use a Veiler or an Imperm on Pollux, and they will wait for Chaos so you can't go into Pleiades, but if you have your Seducius, you can search this, and then get Pleiades this way. 1 copy of Constellar Star Cradle. This is basically a salvage for the deck, but it stops you from using the battle phase the turn you activate this card, which is not a huge thing for this deck, because you cannot really OTK. I do play one way to OTK, but it doesn't happen too often. I just play it as an insurance strategy, just in case it can happen. But this card adds 2 Constellar monsters from your grave to your hand, so you can get them back from the grave by just searching this card with Seducius, which just gives you something that you would consider playing something like Pot of Avarice before, but now I think you do have enough recovery on your own with this card and Sombra that you don't really need to play Pot of Avarice. 3 copies of Tenki, because Chaos is a Beast Warrior, and Chaos is basically the monster you want to get on the field ASAP, because you cannot get access to your Pleiades without it, unless you go into Galaxy Soldier, of course. 1 copy of Rhoda. Pollux is a warrior, so by playing 1 more copy of it actually makes the deck a little bit more consistent. You need as many search power as you want deck like this, because unless you see the monsters, then you won't be able to do much. 1 copy of Monster Reborn. I think this card is insane in the deck, because play Galaxy Soldier. Sometimes you just don't have enough monsters to use both Galaxy Soldier's effect and actually make something more on top of getting the Infinity on the field. But if you have Monster Reborn, then you can do a lot, because you can get a monster back from the grave. Also, Sombra works with that, because if you discard 2 monsters, then you can just get one of them back by banishing the other one and then extra normal summoning it. So cards like this and Sombra makes Galaxy Soldier not a huge neg for the deck, because in any other light-based decks, if you cannot really do anything with the light monsters you're discarding, then yes, you're negging like 2 cards for just an Infinity, which I don't think is worth, but in this deck it can actually work very, very well. 1 copy of Double or Nothing. I do play Utopia Double, which is something I don't really play in decks. I mean, I wouldn't play it in a deck that doesn't really need it, because against even if you're playing a control deck, if you're playing something like Trap Tricks, you don't really need a fast win condition, because you know you can control the board for multiple turns. In this deck, you can't really afford to do that, because you know your disruptions are limited to your Xyz materials. As long as you have materials under Pleiades, you're good to go, but the disruption is not as huge as you think it is. So if you're going second, you need to be able to find an opportunity to bait some negates and then go into something like Utopia Double and try to OTK, because you can't afford to play the grind game with your opponent, especially in a format like this with Drytorn and Eldritch that get just so free recovery every single turn from the graveyard. So you can't really afford to play the grind game, so you need to play something like this. In other decks, I wouldn't really think playing this bricky card in the deck would actually be worth, but in a deck like this that you have to finish the game as fast as possible, you need to be able to play something like this, especially because you cannot play Boros or Dragon. It's very, very hard to get 4 monsters on the field, 4 Boros Sword, and then having another monster to be able to switch into the defense. So yeah, that's very, very hard. For the traps, play 3 copies of Sanctum. Against combo, you need to be able to shut them down because you can get OTK'd very easily. Against control, having a Pleiades and Infinity on the field sometimes can be enough because control decks are not very explosive. But if you're playing against combo, these negates might not be enough to save you from an OTK, so you need to be able to stun your opponent from the extra deck with stuff like Scythe in order to be able to get a turn back so you can potentially OTK them. So that's why I think if you're playing this deck, you should be playing this for multiple reasons. This is the one reason, and of course the other is I mentioned that Scythe is a level 5 light, so it gives you access to Pleiades, and if you can get 2 Pleiades on the field, then it actually can give you something to work with. And 3 copies of Trap Trick because I'm trying to turbo out Sanctum as fast as possible. For the extra deck, play 2 copies of Pleiades. You don't really need to max this out because, like I said, Infinity is better than Pleiades, so if you can get into Galaxy Soldier, you will not use them for Pleiades, you will use them for Infinity. So the way you're summoning Pleiades is always with Chaos' effect, so I don't think you will ever summon it more than twice. 1 copy of Ptolemy M7. It's another card that you can slap on top of Pleiades. You usually do this when Pleiades is run out of materials because you don't really want to do that unless it has materials, so you can bounce another card and can also bounce cards from your grave back to your hand so you can get something back. If you have a Sombra in the grave, then you can get it back to get more monsters on the field, so that can happen too. 1 copy of Constellar Diamond. This card is a card that you will usually use against something that completely loses to this card, which doesn't happen too often these days because you have to be playing against something like Shadows or Burning Abyss, like the old days. That brings back memories, but still, you don't really face these decks too often. But just for the scenario that you do, you need to be able to have this card in the extra deck just to be able to auto-win. Play the Utopia package, which is 1 Utopia, 1 Utopia double, and 1 Utopia the Lightning. I really like playing the Lightning when I play the Utopia double package. You don't really need to because it's not part of the combo, but because your opponent, when they see Utopia double, they just throw everything they have at it because they know they're going to lose if they let it through. So when your Utopia double gets negated, if you don't have Lightning to slap on top of it to get a monster to attack with, then you're sitting on a monster with 0 attack points, so you can't really do anything with it. But Utopia Lightning gives you a monster that can attack for 5,000 and will be able to negate anything that your opponent has during the damage step, so you can prevent floating effects and stuff like that. So I think if you can find the space and if you're playing the Utopia double package, you should be playing the Utopia the Light. Play 1 copy of Heartland Draco and 1 copy of Zeus. I've mentioned this before in many rank 4 based decks, and I will do it again because if you're playing a rank 4 deck, then you need to be playing these 2 cards if you have access to Zeus, of course, because if you're not a budget player, then you should have access to Zeus. So if you're a fan of the deck, give this combo a try because it's basically a better Exeton Knight. If you think Exeton Knight was broken back in the day, you will be surprised how good this combo is. Even if you just use Zeus effect once because you will not have more than 2 materials, it's such a blowout because if you resolve this, your opponent will pretty much lose everything. And sometimes you don't even need to use this during your own turn. You can just leave the materials under Zeus and use its effect for disruption. So this is why Heartland Draco being able to attack directly gives you access to such a powerhouse that I think you should be playing it if you're playing a rank 4 base deck. 1 copy of Nova and 1 copy of Infinity. You can summon these with Galaxy Soldier. Unfortunately, Scythe is not a machine, so you cannot actually go into Nova with it. But alas, Galaxy Soldier is a great card for the deck, so you need to be able to make access to another good boss monster that gives you more interruption. And for the generic rank 4s, play 1 copy of Tornado Dragon. I use this mainly when I draw Scythe. I would never summon this because even if you're playing against Eldritch, which is a backrow deck, you would much rather summon something like a Dweller to be able to stop them from recovering all their plays than just trying to destroy a backrow, which is most likely going to float anyway, so you don't really do much. But when I draw Scythe and I know that my opponent is playing something that relies on the extra deck, then I'm going to summon Tornado Dragon just to make sure that Scythe isn't a brick, because Scythe usually is a brick when you draw it without Sanctum, so yeah, this is why Tornado Dragon is here. 1 copy of Dweller. This stops Eldritch from floating, this stops Drytrons from coming back from the grave, so if you can dent your opponent's Drytron board, then if you can slap a Dweller on top of it, then your opponent will not be able to recover, because this is how Drytron recover. They just keep bringing back the Drytron monster from the grave every single turn. They get more searches with Benten if they have that, so Dweller stops all of that entirely, so this is why it's a great card. 1 copy of Baguska. There are still some decks that can just don't out Baguska, it's just like auto win. If you're playing against stuff like Salamangreat and you can just slap this turn 1, your opponent will not be able to play, and there are a lot of rogue this format, so you need to be able to face not only the meta decks, but you need to be able to face the rogue decks if you want to have a consistent win streak. And 1 copy of Exeton Knight, because sometimes you know that you will not be able to use Heartland Draco's effect, so if your opponent has something that will negate a monster but not actually destroy the monster, then summoning this is better, because if they negate Exeton Knight's effect during your turn, then you can still have the threat of using it during your opponent's battle phase, so you need to be able to just make sure you bait your opponent so they have have wasted something on top of it, on top of being able to negate your Exit on Knight during your own turn. So this is why there are some scenarios that Exit on Knight is better than Zeus, but you hardly ever use it. But still, this deck has a lot of space because I do not want to play any Link monsters. You don't really want to play anything more than a Link 2. You could play something like a Phoenix or a Cerberus if you want to, but I don't think you need it. So this is why I had free space, so I threw in an Exit on Knight in here. So yep, that's the deck, guys. It's a very old school fun deck. If you're a fan of the deck, then you should give it a try again because it has a lot of tools now in order to be able to play. And Blazing Vortex give us support for many more decks. We are going to update almost all of them, so stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos, and see you next time.